can you tell us a little bit about 3Cs, where you're based, who you support, and what kind of organisation you are?
I'm Jo Clare. I'm CEO of 3Cs. The C's stand for Control and Choice in the Community. We've been around since 1993. We provide supported living, community support, social inclusion and day services for about 250 people. That changes daily. And just to give you a flavour of size and geographical coverage, we've got 27 services spread over 5 boroughs in South East and East London. We have 180 staff and our current turnover is just under 5 million.
I just wanted you to let us know a little bit about why you decided to invest in iplanit back in 2010.
Okay. I think it's fair to say I was the new CEO at that time, and my background is in social inclusion, so I'm hugely committed to people having everything that everybody gets, which is really what social inclusion means. So when I arrived in 2008, there were a number of things going on. Firstly, although 3Cs had been at the forefront of the development of person-centred planning back in the day, I think we all kind of guessed that it was jaded, and in particular it was not great about evidence. So the only evidence we had that we were successful at it was a few anecdotes about a few people. And the thing about being really person-centred is it has to be for every individual, and the success has to be for every individual. So that's the first thing I think was a driver for me. The other important thing that was going on is that the commissioning environment, although people have been talking about outcomes for years, actually the commissioning environment was suddenly starting to come to grips with it, and they were organising, particularly in Lewisham and other of our local boroughs, to actually tender on an outcomes-focused basis. Well, we had great intentions, but I don't think we could honestly say we were outcomes focused at that point. And very importantly, I think everybody everywhere was working more towards evidence-based. What are we going to do to prove to ourselves and others that we're actually doing what we say we do? So I didn't want any old system. I wanted something that actually would be person-centred, and I trusted the people involved. And as a result of that, to cut a long story short, we invested £10,000. It's the best 10,000 we've ever invested. We've got it back more than 10 times over since then. We launched in July 2010. We were the first to launch. We've been using iplanit for 6 years, and we're actually still discovering gems that it can be used for.
It's great to hear the background of it. When you first implemented, and actually as you say, as you move along the 6 years and you're adding different elements to the system and starting to use different areas that were already there, what have been the main challenges that you've faced and how have you overcome them?
I think one of the biggest challenges was the natural dislike of systems in human services. So anybody who works in social care or health will know that, you know, most of us think that quite rightly, that the real work is the work that we do directly with people. So one of the initial challenges, and especially technology, you know, technology is often seen as a kind of an add-on, an unnecessary a hindrance to the real work. And we dealt with both of those things, the kind of natural dislike of systems and the, oh, it's just going to be a load more work, by really coming to grips with the change management piece. And one of those things was we had to show the benefits really quickly. And the central benefit, which is that people we support were really starting to achieve ordinary lives and all the stuff that we dream of as citizens. We had to show that that was real. And I think in that our internal communications and feedback was key. I think the other thing that is a key challenge, and I'm still not absolutely confident with there, even 6 years on, is getting rid of parallel or old systems. So that business of getting rid of the old work so that you're only doing the new work, I think that's a challenge for most organisations. Now more than ever, waste in any kind of human service, we could never afford it. It was never a good idea. under austerity and the new demands and cost pressures that most organisations are subject to, waste in systems is absolutely intolerable. So that's really hugely important, I think. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to was it's a technology-based system. It's web-based, but still people need to have some basic skills around technology. When we did our initial assessment, only 30% of staff, before we actually launched iplanit, had the computer skills necessary to learn how to use it. So the other thing that we did really importantly was get somebody who was an expert, he was actually a guy from our board, to help us with an IT strategy that helps us address the issue around having the hardware in the right places and getting people skilled up. So just to show where we've come from, 30% of people at the time had the skills, and now our KPI is regularly 90% or above. So we've changed enormously in terms of our computer literacy as an organisation. And finally, I think we showed that it was sponsored from the top of the organisation and we held it important. And therefore, whatever people thought of the system and however frustrated they might be, they knew it was not going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of this next question really, is what were those main selling points and motivators? You've covered some of them. Is there anything more that you wanted to say about that?
I'm not going to pretend that the actual support that leads to people achieving ordinary lives and dreams isn't an executive activity. I believe it is, and I think that's one of the great things about iplanit, is that I actually am in touch with evidence of great support and the achievements that people have out of that at a kind of macro level and at a person-centered level. That means that some of the stuff that we use to motivate people were actually based on that. So being able to measure evidence and value our success, if you like, based on real achievements of real people. So if I break that down, we could really see very quickly that having put the action into planning, stuff wasn't getting lost and people actually were achieving things that might have been around for years but had never got anywhere. And in order to consolidate that, we actually started to use that evidence to give people independence and community awards, very public awards involving local mayors and other locally famous people and so on. We're also, as a result of that evidence, and it's evidence that you can verify, it's not just an anecdote. We also were able to put together a reward and recognition system that was really focused on great support and being able to support people to achieve equal citizenship and paid jobs and social inclusion or other outcomes. And that was, I think, hugely successful for us as a motivator. But coming to, I suppose, what most people would regard as an executive level motivator or selling point, our achievements in winning new business on the strength of track record were a huge motivator for us. To go straight to the actual outcomes of that, back in 2009-10 we were doing very poorly on tendering, and by to date we've applied for 42 tenders in the past 5 years and we've won 20 of them. I think that's, and most importantly, it's been key to us actually surviving. And no, it's not iplanit on its own, but iplanit was a huge part of the source of the evidence of real and authentic track record. I think that when you talk at an executive level about measuring success, we kind of get all wrapped up in data, and data is hugely important. But it's not, and we celebrate when the performance data says we have cause to celebrate, we celebrate. But actually, all staff everywhere need that cause for that, that evidence to celebrate success. to feel motivated in their work. So I think what iplanit has done is really contributed hugely to us doing what we say on the tin. So instead of it just being an aspiration to support people to have control and choice in their lives and to contribute as equal citizens, to get paid jobs, to achieve dreams and so on, we can actually prove it now. We can prove it and verify it, so we can see it on the system and then we can ask people about it. So we've kind of got a double lock on that. We can prove it on the one hand and we can celebrate that success. So as I said before, the reward and recognition is based on real things. I gave you a flavour of where we've come from, of 42 tenders, 20 successes, and actually a key to us being sustainable at the moment, faced with the same sustainability challenges as everyone else, nonetheless still here, still sustainable. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the story of that, because I think for me it's been key, and for my senior managers and trustees it's been key in terms of us sticking with this system and if you like celebrating the success of it. So back in 2009, we're in the first round of tendering with our main commissioner, we lost 100% of our services that were in that tender, and in the feedback that came back, what the commissioner said was, you've got a great development direction. We'd put actually iplanit in that development direction, but at that point it hadn't been launched, so it wasn't a reality. A great development direction, but very little evidence of track record. Okay, and I think, you know, I had to say that was fair enough. It really was, and it wasn't that we weren't doing some good work. We were. We got pockets of really quite good practice, some exemplary practice, but it wasn't everywhere, and we've got no evidence. And what happened was, as a result from 2010 and being able to show people's actual successes from a very early stage in that rollout, we were able to start using that, with people's permission, using those success stories, using it at an individual level, even then being able to use some of the aggregated data reports about what the commissioner was particularly interested in, so the outcomes that they had agreed with us. And so that meant two things. One, we started to develop a proven track record, and two, not just at a kind of written glossy level when you put in your tender, but that those same stories were live in the interviews, and it meant that I, as CEO, and not somebody who works on the front line, could talk articulately, well I hope it was articulate, and more persuasively about real people and their real achievements, and not just me but everybody who participated in that new business venture. And I'm convinced from the feedback that we've had, so some of the feedback that we were given a couple of years into using iplanit and certainly using it as evidence for new business, was that from a commissioner's point of view we'd made a paradigmatic shift. So we'd given the impression of moving from an organisation that aspired to be person-centred into one that really was delivering it in terms of people planning stuff and actually achieving it.
Yeah, so if I move on to the next question, which is, we've covered a little bit about, but those real benefits that you felt on the executive level, directors, chief executive, trustees.
Okay, so the one thing I'm going to say very quickly again, because I'll keep saying this, at an executive level, as CEO, I still need to know that each individual is getting what we've promised them. So I'm going to say something about that very quickly. I can trust without taking on trust that things are what staff say they are, because iplanit gives me a window into our support of each individual and evidence that we're keeping our promises to people. Yeah, so that continues to be the case. I think in terms of that other stuff that we need to do as leaders and managers, which is efficient monitoring and reporting, it gives me and my senior managers a huge amount of stuff that it couldn't give us before we had it and didn't give us at the beginning. So, for example, we used to spend hours pulling together performance indicators around social inclusion, so paid employment, volunteering, supporting people into education, self-advocacy and user involvement and so on. And I think it's fair to say that Alison, our head of social inclusion, used to tear her hair out pulling that stuff together for our 6 board meetings a year, 4 of which those reports had to go to. And she had to consult with and get stuff from almost every team in the organisation. Now, just by contrast, if I just pick the employment one, so whether somebody's in paid employment or not, because we have the discipline of updating the profile information, Al's able to generate a report that tells her at any given point, and everybody has to update by quarter end, how many people are in paid employment. So I'm guessing that that takes her, by the time she's made herself comfortable, about 5 minutes, instead of probably 4 days' work on some of those stats in the past. And we haven't tried to quantify that in terms of time, but just from that story you can see what a potentially huge difference it makes in terms of our efficiency. And the other thing is that, again, it gives us triangulation. So instead of just relying on a report that says X number of people are in paid employment, if I want to randomly check whether it's likely that some of that's accurate, I can, I can drill down and see where people have completed and got into employment. So it means again that we've got not just evidence but a means to verify some of that evidence, and again I can go to the actual people and ask them too. So I've now got 3 sources of potential evidence for the same piece of truth, if you like.
Our next question is about what your favourite module or capability is on iplanit.
I do have favourite modules, but I have to say that it's the whole thing that is my real favourite, and that's its transparency, and it's the addition it makes to our capability to measure success for real and to prove some of that stuff. Having said that, I think that I'm not sure the praises of the profile information are sung often enough. We actually we used to have files in folders about people, people's contact details and stuff like that. We now use that as our contact database. So again, that's got rid of an old system that was very clunky paper stuff to this, which is much much simpler. So that on the one hand. It also means, for example, that we all have to have business disaster recovery plans, service recovery plans. Means that actually if something did go down, as long as it didn't affect the World Wide Web, we'd actually be able to find out and organise ourselves around real people and where they are and their needs very quickly, so be able to mobilise without somebody having to come to head office. So that's really important, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know that at 3Cs you use the survey module as well.
I'm very committed to satisfaction surveys not just being conducted by staff, not because I don't trust staff, but because I think that there's natural loyalty from people we support to staff, and so they don't want to say the tough stuff, and that's just a reality. So being committed to that means that actually the satisfaction survey module on iplanit does a number of things. So as well as it makes data analysis really efficient, it actually means that actually peer survey coordinators can own parts of the data analysis because they don't need data analysis skills. It actually generates it for them. So it means that they're more in touch with the output or the outcome, which is great. But at least as important as that, it's given us an opportunity to train peer survey coordinators in how to use tablets, for example. And what we know is that the people we support belong to the 1 in 5 in the UK who are actually digitally excluded. So it might seem like a small point, but for me that's a really important opportunity and one I really value.
The next question is just about what your next steps are for iplanit at 3Cs.
Yeah. So I've talked about us already being able to use iplanit to report on things like the regularity and quality of person-centred planning, risk assessment and so on. All of those processes help us comply with regulations in the Health and Social Care Act 2008, which underpins CQC compliance. So we're already on it to some extent about what it can do around compliance, but we are clear it can do a heap more. So for example, at our most recent CQC inspection, for which we got good in all areas incidentally across 26 services, the inspector used people's iplanit accounts as a window into compliance. I'll give you an example. In terms of involvement in decision making, the inspector found a plan for somebody with learning disabilities, autism and visual impairment to have the Lewisham talking newspaper as part of something that he wanted. It was on iplanit, it was ticked on there as completed, and when the CQC inspector visited that project and met that person, it was the first question he asked him. And Ian, I'm going to say because it was Ian, duly got his talking newspaper out and showed the inspector how it worked. So we can see that this the window for inspection is already being used, if you like, and that's the first time we've had an inspector against the new regime, and of course they're very focused on outcomes and involvement in decision making and so on. So what we're definitely going to do is to increase iplanit's value as a source of verifying compliance over the next period. For example, one of the things we thought we'd do, given that the inspector will be looking at iplanit and people's accounts and at some of the reports, we're going to consider converting the key lines of inquiry into key performance indicators which can be linked to people's outcomes, so that actually we'll be able to show the inspector a range of things that really help us to demonstrate that we're complying. Yeah, and the other thing is that the inspector would be able to interrogate that information, so they'd be able to drill down and see that evidence of compliance at the individual level, and in the same way that the inspector did last time, to actually test it on the ground, to ask somebody about that, whatever that thing is. I think the last thing I want to say about next steps, you know, there are lots of things we want to maximise, so we're not getting maximum benefit out of notes and logs. We're going to do stuff around that. Really want to come to grips with the calendar module, because I think that that could revolutionise the amount of unnecessary recording we do about what goes on daily. But the big thing for us is that in the face of ever-increasing workloads, you know, I don't know any organisation that isn't under pressure, more now than certainly in my experience in the third sector for the last 15 years or so. We are highly focused on maximising iplanit as a distance management tool to help us keep on top of key aspects of quality and safety. You know, when you've been knocked about by commissioning social work, I'm not disrespecting those people, they have a job to do, where we're dealing with the impact of cost pressures, yes, a tougher regulation regime. It's really important to keep on top of those key aspects of quality and safety, and not to get pushed off that perch. So I think iplanit is going to be key to that, and it's going to be about coming to grips with the distance management, the executive reporting stuff.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And lastly, would you recommend iplanit? I think I know the answer to that one, but why?
Okay, I'd say it's too easy to lose people's dreams in paper systems or poor systems and minutes at the best of times. And it's not that anybody's doing anything bad, it's just the way it is. That stuff gets lost. And even more so now that austerity's put social care under the cosh around resources. So I'd recommend iplanit to any organisation intent on making person-centred practice a reality and supporting people to live full and ordinary lives, and any organisation that really is intent on making sure that the key aspects of quality and safety remain intact even in this hugely difficult environment.